Let's switch to English and let's start with today's topic. Last week in our lecture we repeated some things about Angular. I tried to refresh your memory and tell you a little bit about how you use Angular, what the advantages are, and so on. Today we will do kind of similar things, but today we will do it about .NET. Last year you spent one school year with me learning the foundations of .NET development, and we have been using .NET version 5. Now this year we are going to switch to .NET 6. .NET 6 is currently in release candidate mode, and in November it will hit the market with release to manufacture. So I think it is end of November, something like this. This will be the final release. But the release candidate is already ready for production use. Now, before we go right into the topic, let's quickly recap some fundamental things. Again, a game that you already know. Imagine you're trying to get a job at a company. This company is using .NET, but maybe an old version of .NET. And during the interview, you get asked, hey, why should we stay on .NET? What is .NET? And what are current developments in the world of .NET? You are fresh out of school, so you know the latest and greatest development. Tell me about it. What would be your answer? Just a quick brainstorming. Just a quick discussion. What is this .NET in general all about? How would you describe it? Let's start with the basics. Which company mainly cares for maintaining .NET? Yes? Okay, good. Is .NET a new platform? Yes and no. What do you mean with yes and no? Okay, how was that old platform called? .NET Framework. The .NET Framework is the old version of .NET. If you say it is an old version, what was old? Why do you consider it old? Is it no longer supported? It is still supported, so why is it old? But which two key properties are missing in .NET Framework compared to current versions of .NET? Yeah?
I think .NET Framework only works on Windows.
Yes, it was only thought for Windows. And second key property? Closed source, exactly. That's the main difference. And when you get in an interview and people start to talk to you about .NET, this is something that definitely will come up. .NET Framework, old because only Windows and closed source. You have to know that. And this is an easy win during an interview, okay? Now, you said there is a new version of .NET. How is it called? .NET 6, correct, exactly, that was the correct answer. If you would have said .NET Core, I would have said that's also already old, because it's no longer called .NET Core. The naming was .NET Framework up until version 4. That's kind of strange. Then Microsoft started to renumber everything and they called it .NET Core, and they started with version 1 again. We had .NET Core 1, .NET Core 2, .NET Core 3, and then Microsoft had a problem because there was .NET Framework 4. If they would have created the .NET Core version 4, the whole world would have collapsed, because nobody would have had an idea what .NET and .NET Core and everything is version 4. So they skipped version 4. And they immediately moved from .NET Core to .NET 5. But they also removed the core. Starting with .NET 5, we are talking about .NET, one .NET. No longer .NET Core. So if you get asked in an interview, which version of .NET have you been working with in the school, you shouldn't say .NET Core 5 or .NET Core 6. That is wrong. It's .NET 5 or .NET 6. Okay? .NET Core is also in maintenance mode. Is it still supported? .NET Core? Yes, which version?
3.1.
Yes, 3. Exactly. The latest minor release from .NET Core 3 is still supported. That's correct. It's a so-called long-term support version, an LTS version. You maybe have heard about that. Is .NET 5 an LTS version? No, it's .NET 6 an LTS version. Yes, why is that important? Why should a company, or why would you care whether something is LTS or not? You were right in describing it, but you said 5 years. Unfortunately, even LTS versions are only supported for 3 years. So 5 years, nobody will support you for that amount of time. That's something of the past. .NET Framework will be supported in 5 years. It will be supported forever, I think. Even Visual Basic is still a thing in Windows, believe it or not. And people are still using it. But .NET LTS is a thing of 3 years. Okay, very good. How does .NET relate to C#? Is C# .NET? Or is .NET C#? Is C# a part of .NET? You said the code for .NET is written in C#. Correct would be you can use C# to write code for .NET, but you can use many other languages too. The whole idea of .NET is to provide a central foundation where many programming languages can sit on top. So you can take a lot of different programming languages. I think there are more than 100 that all compile to .NET. And these languages generate .NET compatible code, intermediate language code, which can be read, started, and executed by .NET, by the so-called common language runtime. The word common here means common language. For all languages that compile to .NET, they have the same runtime. That is meant with common language runtime. Can you name any other very prominent, widely used programming language that is compiled down to .NET that is not C#? C++, kind of. There is a special flavor of C++ which you can compile to .NET, but it's not that widely used. There are more prominent examples for other languages. Yeah? F#, exactly. It's a functional programming language. Or, I mentioned the other programming language too, the one that we don't want to mention anymore. Visual Basic, exactly. People still use it. It's still popular. I wouldn't create a new project with it, but there is still a lot of software out there which is written in Visual Basic. And F# is also a very good example. It's worthwhile taking a look at F#. F# has a lot of very interesting concepts in it. So unfortunately, I never had the time to dive into F#, but if I would have a little bit of free time, I would probably take a closer look at F# because it's really interesting, very interesting concepts here. Okay, good. So this is C# and .NET. There is a very important thing that you have to keep in your mind, that is the .NET base class library. You often hear the term BCL, base class library, when you talk about .NET. Do you have any idea what the base class library is? Or can you guess it from the context? Okay. Yes and no. You are right. It's the basic foundation, and one example that you brought is string interpolation. String interpolation is, strictly speaking, a feature of the language. It's a C# feature. But you are right, the C# compiler compiles string interpolations into calls to, for instance, string.format, and this is part of the base class library. You're right. Any other examples? What could be in a base class library, in a BCL? Parsing, type conversions and converters and parsing. Yes, you're right, absolutely. Other examples? Input, output, file I/O, exactly. Other examples? Reflection. Have you ever heard of reflection? What is reflection? Exactly, to get metadata for the program which is currently running or which you can load from disk. Reflection, I reflect about myself. I'm meditating and thinking about my very nature. That's reflection. The program thinks about itself and takes a look into its own inside and can tell you which classes are there, which methods are there, and so on and so on. Exactly, garbage collector is another very important thing. What is the garbage collector? Exactly, it collects the objects which are no longer referenced. Garbage collector has some classes in the BCL with which you can interact with the garbage collector, but the garbage collector itself, it's part of the common language runtime. Can you tell me other languages which use a garbage collector? Yeah? Java? Yeah, correct. Any other one? No, C++. C++ is object-oriented and has no garbage collector. What about Go? It does. What about Rust? No, it does not. Exactly. Yeah. So there are languages which have a garbage collector. They are called so-called managed languages. Very often they are called managed languages. And then you have languages which do not have a garbage collector. All .NET languages have a garbage collector. That's simple. What about JavaScript? Did you ever free something in JavaScript? JavaScript has a garbage collector too. Yep. Okay, awesome. So now we have in our mind a fresh picture about what this .NET stuff is all about. And now we will switch gears and talk about ASP.NET Core. Did I just do a mistake? I used the word core. Was that correct or was that wrong? It was correct, yes. It's somewhat strange. Even if you talk about .NET 6, they still call the frameworks ASP.NET Core and Entity Framework Core. Don't ask me why. It's marketing. Okay? It's really, really strange, but it is like it is. Yes?
Is it ASP.NET Core 6 or just?
Yes, it's ASP.NET Core 6. It's very strange, isn't it? Yeah, it's strange. It's strange. The problem, the underlying problem is that the versions of the frameworks, they were counted differently from .NET. So, for instance, there is an Entity Framework 6, but this is not the Entity Framework that comes with .NET 6. So if they would call Entity Framework of .NET 6 just Entity Framework, there would be an Entity Framework 6, but there already was one that came with .NET Core 3. So it is really, really a problem. And what can you learn from that? Names, product names, library names are important. Yes? And you see with this example that it's really hard to do program namings and library namings properly and versioning and so on. It's really hard. It's not that easy. Okay, good. So let's talk about ASP.NET Core. If you would have been asked, or if you would be asked in an interview, what is ASP.NET? ASP.NET Core, what would you answer? A framework for web APIs. That is not complete, but the answer is correct. You can implement web APIs with ASP.NET Core. Can you also build interactive websites? So server-side HTML generation with ASP.NET Core? Correct. You can do both. You can generate the HTML on the server side, and you can generate just JSON, REST APIs on the server side. Correct. Exactly. You said web API. Do you maybe also know which sub-frameworks exists inside ASP.NET Core to build interactive websites? Blazor. Blazor is one example. Who has heard about Blazor? What is Blazor? ASP.NET Core Blazor, what is that? It's relatively young. It's the youngest one. It can use WebAssembly if it runs on the client side. It can also run on the server side. Then it doesn't use WebAssembly, but it can use WebAssembly, definitely. Exactly. You write websites in C#, but also with HTML and CSS. So a short answer would have been, it's like Angular, but with C# instead of TypeScript. That's not completely true, but it's true to a certain extent. So if you don't like TypeScript, but you like Angular, you should take a look at Blazor. Really a good thing. Okay, Blazor, what else? Have you ever heard of MVC? Modal View Controller? Yes, did you already do that? Maybe in another course here at the school? Yes. So ASP.NET Core MVC is also something that exists there. It's not the newest thing. It's still widely used out there in practice, but yeah, it's there. Ever heard of Razor Pages? It's also a part of ASP.NET Core. So Razor Pages MVC are for dynamic web applications, and ASP.NET Core Web API is for building APIs. Right. If you don't use ASP.NET Core, if you don't use .NET at all, and you need to build a REST API, which alternative platforms could you think of? Quarkus, Java. What else? Node, with Express, for instance. Anything else? Go has become very, very popular when it comes to building web APIs, because it's the platform that sits beneath Docker and Kubernetes and so on. So Go is also a programming language that is very widely used when it comes to API development. Node, Go, ASP.NET, Java, these are the four ones which really dominate the market. There are other contenders too, definitely. There are still things like, I don't know, maybe not in the API space, but still things like PHP and Ruby and things like that. But the four big ones are, if you know some of them, you're already well suited for building APIs. So let me tell you what we are going to do after the break. After the break, we are doing a reacting on stuff. So we are taking a look at a YouTube video. It's a community stand-up video from Microsoft. Do you know what community stand-up means? In the past, if the product teams of Microsoft, if they met and discussed what should we put in the product, this was behind closed doors. So there were marketing experts and product experts and developers, and they came together and they showed each other what they are planning. They were discussing their latest ideas, and they were discussing the direction into which this thing is heading. With open source, those project meetings, those stand-ups had to be opened. And this is what a community stand-up is. A community stand-up is a broadcasted meeting where the product owners, the key people behind the framework in question come together, and they take a camera and they just broadcast it live via Twitch, YouTube, whatever you want to do. And you as a community member, if you use ASP.NET Core and .NET 6 and so on, you can tune in and you can make comments. You can really directly influence what Microsoft is doing. Such a community stand-up meeting by Microsoft has always the same structure. First, somebody showcases some really cool projects from the community. So they just take a look at the web, they are doing some Google researches, and they just look up very interesting open source projects. Sometimes they feature a blog post. Sometimes they maybe discuss a new book that somebody in the community has written. So the key people of .NET, they are sitting in a room and taking a look at what is the community doing and what exceptional things did the community achieve in the last few weeks. And then they always have a topic. And we are going to take a look at a community stand-up meeting where they are discussing the reasons and functionalities behind the concept of minimal APIs. So we will hear from a dev and from a product owner directly why they created ASP.NET Core Minimal API and how it works. The whole Minimal API was a driver for a lot of functionality that came into .NET 6. So many new C# features were built because the ASP.NET team requested those features. So by looking at this community stand-up, we can also recap some new features of C#, and we can get an idea how product development, how architecture, and how designing IT digital products really works. You're now in the 5th class. It's no longer just about writing the correct syntax in a programming language like C#. In the 5th class, it's also about having a broader picture. Why do they do the things that they do? How do they come to the designs, to the architectures that they build? These things don't fall from the sky. The names of the methods, the design of the classes, the structure of the DLLs and NuGet packages. Somebody sits down and thinks hard about all these details. And such videos, as the one that we are going to look at today, they give you an idea what's really going on behind the scenes. Sometimes as developers, if you take a powerful framework like Angular or ASP.NET, you take it for granted. It's like the rules of physics. It's like gravity. Nobody thinks about gravity. It's just there. But that's different with ASP.NET Core, with Angular, and so on. There are people creating this stuff. And the beauty of open source is you can influence it. And that's not theory. That's practice. You can sit down, you can add something to ASP.NET Core, and it maybe will end up in the product and will influence hundreds of thousands of developers. And that's really cool. That's very special in IT. I don't know of any other branch, of any other job where this is possible. This direct involvement of people independent of social status, of financial possibilities, of location on this planet. If you have internet access and you have a computer and you can compile C#, you can join it. And that's really great. Okay, this is what we are going to do. We are now doing a short break for 5 minutes, and then we will jump right into the video and we will discuss it, okay? Good, enjoy the break.